How Texas joined the Union. That's what we'll talk about today in the history video. I'm kind of doing a video of American history, starting with Washington. You can check all the back ones on dickmorris.com, and together they make quite an interesting history lesson. After we last time talked about Andrew Jackson and how he basically set up the Democratic Party and how his vice president, Martin Van Buren, organized it into a really complete political machine powered by federal jobs and appointments and patronage. Van Buren served one term. The Bank of the United States stopped. The economy fell apart. There was a huge recession, and he was voted out of office in 1840. And the guy who was elected was called Tippecanoe and Tyler, too. Tippecanoe referred to William Henry Harrison, who had been the governor of Indiana and as a general had fought the Indian chief Tecumseh at the Battle of Tippecanoe and had defeated him. This was an Indian confederation that was really becoming a nation. He was elected, and he lived 1 month, shortest tenure of any president, and he died. And the vice president, John Tyler, took over. Now, here's where the politics become important. Van Buren was a Democrat, and Harrison was the first person from the newly formed Whig Party, which was kind of a successor to the Federalist Party, which by then was defunct, to be elected. And he was elected in a mass campaign of all kinds of hoopla and rolling barrels down the street and whiskey and everything. But his vice president, John Tyler, was a Democrat who joined the ticket in an effort to prop it up. And he became the first vice president in history to become president on the death of the president. The first 8 presidents had not died in office. And when he took office, he was called His Excellency, and everybody was making fun of him, and nobody would give him the right time of day. And increasingly the Whigs turned on him because he wasn't a Whig, and the Democrats turned on him because he had run with the Whig Party, so he had no constituency. But he nevertheless wanted to get reelected, so he hit on a scheme. He would support the annexation of Texas to the United States. Texas, in the meantime, had been part of Mexico, and the Texicans, as they called them back then, declared their independence and fought a vigorous war for independence against Mexico. One of the first battles in it was the Alamo, where all the Texans were wiped out. But then eventually at the Battle of San Jacinto, Santa Anna, the Mexican dictator, personally led his forces, and Sam Houston, who was commanding the Texas forces, actually captured Santa Anna, and in return for releasing him as a prisoner of war, Texas got its independence. But as an independent country, it was not part of the United States, and there was real resistance to bringing it into the U.S. because of the question of slavery that had come to dominate everything in the United States in these years of 1840 to 1844. And the problem was that as a southern state, it would tip the balance, and the Southerners would have more votes in the Senate than the anti-slavery forces. And the anti-slavery types were also worried that Texas was so big they could chop it up into 4 or 5 states and assure permanent domination of the Senate by the slave interests. So the North said, no, we're not letting Texas into the Union. And then Britain and France began to court Texas to try to make it their ally. The British were very desirous of building up an empire on the western half of the United States. They already owned the Oregon Territory, which was western Canada down through Washington, Oregon, a little bit of Montana, and much of Idaho. And now they wanted to own Texas, and they felt they could really create an empire on the Pacific coast. And the French were desirous of expanding their influence as well. Houston didn't want to join either of them, but he flirted with them. He kept having dinner with them and diplomatic exchanges and all that to try to scare the United States into letting Texas into the Union. Well, John Tyler decided that was the ticket to his reelection. So he got up there and began advocating vigorously for Texas to be admitted to the Union. And the Northerners opposed it, the Southerners supported it. So Tyler negotiated a treaty with the Republic of Texas to bring it into the Union. And he submitted it to the United States Senate, and it got a majority, but it failed to get a two-thirds majority because all of the Whigs who were anti-slavery and came from the North voted against it. So Tyler was really stymied. And it looked like this issue would dominate the presidential election of 1844. And the election was supposed to feature Martin Van Buren, the former president, running as the Democrat, and Henry Clay, the founder of the Whig Party, running as the Whig. That was going to be the fight, and it was going to be an enormous, enormous battle royal. Then Van Buren met with Clay, and they agreed to keep the Texas issue out of the election, that neither of them would take a position on it, and implied that neither of them would annex Texas to the United States, that they didn't want this issue to divide the country and eventually lead possibly to a civil war. So Tyler saw that, and he saw his chance. He said, hey, the Southerners are going to run out on Van Buren because they want Texas in the Union. And here he's saying that he won't fight for it. So Clay, we knew would be against it because he was a Whig. So Tyler said, hey, maybe I can get elected to a full term on my own. So he submitted to Congress the treaty, as I told you, and it was rejected. Then they came up with a great idea. Submit a joint resolution of annexation, which would require a majority of each house, but not a two-thirds majority. And he announced he was going to do that. Van Buren was hounded out of the election by the Democratic Party, and because they wanted Texas in. And they nominated James K. Polk instead. And Polk campaigned overtly on a platform of bringing Texas into the Union. And Henry Clay, who opposed it, was defeated, and it looked like Texas would be admitted. And Tyler's joint resolution, while it didn't win him any re-election and the Democrats nominated Polk instead of Tyler, it did lead to the annexation of Texas. And Texas was brought into the Union, not as a treaty with a separate country, but as a joint resolution passed by Congress. The other day I was invited to give a speech by Congressman Louis Gohmert from Texas, whose district includes Tyler, Texas. And I began the talk by explaining to the audience why their town was named in honor of John Tyler. Nobody knew it, but it was an interesting piece of gossip to give them. Now, when Polk came in, he initiated the most incredible expansion of the United States ever, dwarfing even the Louisiana Purchase. And he is the single most underrated president of the United States, and we'll talk about him next Saturday. Thanks a lot.